Hello comrades, now this is just a little short announcement. As I'm sure you know, I've got a handful of gameplay videos on my channel. I have decided that I will take them down and move them to a separate channel just because I think they are a distraction and they are, well, they're not getting as many views as the other videos by far. And yeah, especially in the future, if I make more, I don't want them to flood this channel, because at this rate there will be more of those videos than my political, well, they are kind of political, but there will be more of gameplay videos than other videos, simply because of the fact that they are much faster and easier to make. So that doesn't mean that I necessarily put as much time into them as I put into my regular videos. It's actually quite the contrary. But anyway, I would just like to, that's just what I wanted to say, and the link to the channel will be in the description if you want to go there. But for those of you who aren't interested, I don't want to bother people who really don't care. I don't want to bother them with gameplay videos. So the focus of this channel will remain the same. Political videos will be coming here. And that said, for those who are interested in checking out the new channel, I'm a political kind of guy. There are political overtones in my gameplay videos as well, but if you're not into games and stuff, then don't bother. Today our topic is imperialism. This is a very important topic in today's situation, and opposing imperialism really, I think, should be our main concern as revolutionaries, and I hope to demonstrate why. Let's start by defining what exactly imperialism is. Imperialism could be defined as something like a country imposing economic and/or political, though mostly economic, hegemony on another country. At least that's the way I would try to define it. But here is Lenin's definition, and from his pamphlet Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And it's actually pretty funny, because he says basically that I can give you a short definition, but it would not really work, because you can't really define it in a few words. So then he just gives a long definition. So this is a kind of a long quote, but I'm gonna read it to you anyway. So this is Lenin. If it were necessary to give the briefest possible definition of imperialism, we should have to say that imperialism is the monopoly stage of capitalism. Such a definition would include what is most important, for on the one hand, finance capital is the bank capital of the very big monopolist bank, merged with the capital of the monopolist associations of industrialists, and on the other hand, the division of the world is the transition from a colonial policy, which has extended without hindrance to territories unseized by any capitalist power, to a colonial policy of monopolist possession of the territory of the world, which has been completely divided up. But very brief definitions, although convenient, for they sum up the main points, are nevertheless inadequate, since we have to deduce from them some especially important features of the phenomenon that has to be defined. And so, without forgetting the conditional and relative value of all the definitions in general, which can never embrace all the concatenations, I don't even know that word, of a phenomenon in its full development, we must give a definition of imperialism that will include the following 5 of its basic features. 1. The concentration of production and capital has developed to such a high stage that it has created monopolies which play a decisive role in economic life. 2. The merging of bank capital with industrial capital and the creation on the basis of this financial capital of a financial oligarchy. 3. The export of capital as distinguished from the export of commodities, acquires exceptional importance. 4. The formation of international monopolist capitalist associations which share the world among themselves. And 5. The territorial division of the whole world among the biggest capitalist powers is completed. Imperialism is capitalism at the stage of development at which the dominance of monopolies and finance capital is established, in which the export of capital has acquired pronounced importance, in which the division of the world among the international trusts has begun, in which the division of all territories of the globe among the biggest capitalist powers has been completed. And in case you don't know what export of capital means, it means investment. So, yes, that is the definition. It's you might have to look up the book, and I recommend that you do. This is from Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, and this is from chapter 7, Imperialism as a Special Stage of Capitalism. But I recommend you check it out. You might have to read that a couple of times to really grasp what it means, but so I'll give you some different types of imperialism. Colonialism. This is the classic form of imperialism. When people hear the word imperialism, this is usually what they think about. A country is sending an army to subjugate another, and then using its population as slave or semi-slave labor, stealing its resources, and imposing absolute dictatorial rule over the colony. This always includes also the suppression of the native culture and the imposition of foreign colonizer culture on the population. I'm sure you all know examples of this: British colonies in Africa and India, French colonies in Asia, and so on. They went in, killed the natives or made them into slaves, stole the land and the resources, and practiced absolute dictatorial rule over the natives, depriving them of even the most basic human rights, calling them savages, subhuman, etc. You know, kind of like what the Americans did to the indigenous peoples. This form is largely gone, although in some forms it still exists. Maybe we'll discuss this in more detail when we get to the national question, but that will have to be some other time. Neocolonialism. This is the modern face of imperialism. This and a couple of other things. Neocolonialism is basically the same as colonialism, except it's not overt, but it's covert. You'll notice that in almost all the countries that used to be colonies, the economic and political relations between them and the colonizer imperialist countries have not substantially changed. Instead of the imperialists just sailing there on a galleer and starting to rape and pillage, they use more covert methods. They institute a comprador class of corrupt capitalist bureaucrats who serve their interests in the country and are willing to prostitute their country to foreign imperialism as long as they and their small circle personally get rich in the process. This means essentially that the country, for example Saudi Arabia or the Philippines, has a puppet government controlled by a foreign power, in this instance the United States of America. Instead of the US owning all the land and resources openly and using the population as slaves, they do something different. The puppet government in these countries open their countries up for investments by American companies. American companies come in, they buy the land and the resources for pennies and start looting the country. This is incredibly cold-blooded and vicious. If you look at the Philippines or India, for example, this literally means driving hundreds and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people from their homes, their small farm plots or what have you, and leveling and burning the rainforests in order for American logging companies and mining companies to steal their natural resources. If the native population resists, like in the case of India and the Philippines, they do, the comprador puppet government tries to kill them. And of course the imperialists will try to help the puppet governments, like in the case of, the Philippines. The US has sent advisors and military experts to train the to train the Filipino paramilitaries, and is increasing its military presence in the Philippines to try to crush the rebellion, which is making them lose profits. In India, the Naxalite Maoist insurgents are in open armed combat against the Indian government and frequently attack Western mining operations and logging operations. The rebellion is supported mostly by the rural peasantry, the rural poor, and the tribal people, who are all under attack by Western corporations. The situation is very similar in the Philippines, where the New People's Army is also fighting against Western logging operations and is also supported largely by the rural tribal people and small peasants who are being driven off their land and their homes and from the forests that are being destroyed by the imperialists and their comprador puppets. The imperialists also want to exploit the native population for cheap labor. So it's not about just the resources, the ore in the ground and the oil and the rubber and water and lumber. It's not only about that, it's about they also want the labor. This is easily apparent. Nike factories in Bangladesh, Apple and Microsoft products made in China, Taiwan, South Korea, diamond mining in various African countries. The people in these countries are paid next to nothing and are super exploited. They're also denied democratic rights, such as the right to unionize and organize. If they fight for their rights, the comprador puppets will try to repress them, because that is what the imperialist masters tell them to do. Economic hegemony. Oftentimes, this economic and political subjugation is not quite as complete as in the above-mentioned cases. In many cases, different countries are targets of various different imperialist countries, and there's a comprador class, but it's not a complete puppet of one or more specific imperialist countries. The main feature remains the same. The natural resources, labor, and markets of the country are controlled by the Western imperialists, specifically various Western corporations. Generally, the entire world can be divided into exploiter or exploited countries, imperialist countries, and targets of imperialism. All the Western capitalist countries are imperialist countries, despite the fact that many of them don't actively participate in military operations in other countries. This is very important to understand, that being an imperialist country doesn't mean that you have to invade other countries constantly. That's not the case. They don't have to invade other countries necessarily. Again, I will use Finland, my home country, as an example, because it is generally regarded as a social democratic country, a peaceful country, a harmless country, a quote-unquote Nordic mixed economy country, and so on. Finland clearly is not, and is not seen as the same as the United States and Great Britain, for example. Nevertheless, Finland is an imperialist country. So, how is Finland an imperialist country, and how does it benefit from imperialism? Finland is a NATO partner, despite not being a full member. Finland takes part in NATO training and military operations in a limited degree, thus strengthening world imperialism. Finnish corporations have investments in third world countries, reaping super profits because of imperialist super exploitation. They exploit the labor, push national businesses out of business, allowing themselves control of the market, and of course they steal the natural resources. How does Finland benefit from Western imperialism in general, even when it doesn't take an active part in it? So basically, in general, I mentioned specific things, like the fact that there are companies with investments, but what is the general benefit? Well, cheap commodities produced in the third world through imperialist super-exploitation are abundant in Finland's markets. Cheap raw materials are sold from the third world, and Finland and its industry benefits. So even if Finland wasn't an overtly imperialistic country, it would still benefit. from these cheap commodities that are available because of imperialism. Military intervention. Now, why do military interventions take place? Just like the British colonizers used to say that they're in Africa to educate and help the native population, which they declared to be inferior and incapable of self-determination and self-governance. The modern imperialists don't simply outright declare their real motivations or intentions when they invade countries. They say they're invading to protect human rights, democracy, and to stop genocide. There are countless examples like this. Iraq, Syria, Libya, Iraq again. Sometimes they employ other excuses, like that the country is a threat to the US population. For example, Saddam Hussein's supposed weapons of mass destruction, Iran's supposed nuclear program, and North Korea's real nuclear program. They declare these countries are aggressors that threaten the US and that threaten world peace. Don't be fooled. The United States and other imperialist powers support the vilest, most totalitarian, most repressive, and most murderous regimes in the world, and have done so in the past, just as today. Like Saudi Arabia, apartheid South Africa, they supported Suharto in Indonesia. They even supported many of the people they later attacked and had no problem with their way of doing things, like Saddam Hussein, Slobodan Milosevic. The real reason is to serve capitalism and profit. The United States imposes no sanctions on Saudi Arabia for human rights violations, while it does so to Cuba and North Korea based on false accusations. Why? Because Saudi Arabia is a US puppet, a client state supplying the US with oil and not using that oil for the benefit of its own people. Why did the US invade Iraq when they originally supported Saddam Hussein for such a long time? Because Saddam wanted a better deal for their oil. Why did the US attempt a CIA coup in Venezuela in 2003? Because Chavez nationalized Venezuelan oil. And suddenly he's a dictator who needs to be, kicked out. What a coincidence. Why are they so interested in going right back into Iraq? I mean, they originally supported Saddam for a really long time, then suddenly they realized, oh, he was a horrible guy, they need to get rid of him. Now, why do they go back in? Okay, they say that it's ISIS. Well, they went in there the first time to get the oil flowing to the US, and now they want to keep it flowing. They are supposedly so concerned about the human rights record of ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, when it is the United States itself that has funded ISIS in Syria to use it to overthrow the democratically elected government of Syria, because Syria doesn't bow down to Western imperialism. That is what is common between Cuba, North Korea, Iran, Syria, and few other places. They don't bow down to Western imperialism, and therefore the imperialists try to destroy them and demonize them to no end. While most people only associate the word imperialism with military invasion is only a means to an end. Imperialism itself takes place in the form of investment. It is only if the target countries don't allow the Western imperialists to invest in their country, to super-exploit their labor, to utilize their resources, and to take over their markets, thus devastating their national bourgeois and petty bourgeois, driving farmers off the land, polluting their nature, and so on, then it is time to use the military. If they don't accept to prostitute their country to imperialism, then the imperialists will use the force of arms, economic sanctions, propaganda warfare, funding terrorists inside the country, and so on, to try to break their resolve.